Pranit Mehta is a co-founder and VP of a business development at Galaxeye Space, a deep tech startup building India's first private constellation of Earth imaging satellites. As an alumnus of IIT Madras, while pursuing a dual degree program in engineering design, he also headed the renowned student team Avishkar Hyperloop. As part of the stint, the team represented Asia at the SpaceX Hyperloop competition organized by Elon Musk. With prior business strategy experience at Dunzo and AB InBev, Pranit currently drives the GTM and operations at Galaxeye, given his passion to evangelize technologies from ideas to product to market. He was awarded the Best Student Entrepreneur on campus at IIT Madras and also invited to speak at multiple forums, including TEDx. Please welcome Pranit.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. So I'm Pranit, and thanks to IIIT for the very warm invite, and glad to be here amid such insightful presentations. So I know we're running a little late on schedule. I'll keep my presentation quite brief. So I'm Pranit, one of the co-founders at Galaxeye. Galaxeye is a startup spun out of IIT Madras, and what I'll be taking the presentation through is essentially how we as a startup are trying to solve a very particular problem in this vast space ecosystem that we are dealing with. When I say solve a particular problem, so we are an Earth observation company. So we've seen from various talks that space is quite huge, and Professor Chandrasekhar's talk mentioned a little bit about remote sensing and Earth observation. And that is the sector of this ecosystem that we are dealing with. So this ecosystem today, as we see, the most common part of this ecosystem is Google Maps, right? So you open satellite view on Google Maps, and there's some point in life where us or people around us have just tried to zoom into our homes, colleges, offices, and whatnot, just to see what our building looks like from space. Right? We've all done that. But the question is, could we have made major decisions? Could we use this technology for a lot more applications? Like now you see a lot of satellite images coming on news relating to a lot of geopolitical conflicts, that certain activity happening on the borders, satellite images tracked A, B, C, D, E, F, G things, right? Now, the one key element, according to us at Galaxeye, is to bring consistency to how imagery is captured today, right? And that is something that I'll be deep diving into as a problem that we're addressing. So quick background about ourselves. So started by 5 members in 2021, very young for what we're talking about here. So we're a 3.5-year-old startup based out of Bangalore. All of us coming from IIT Madras. And one common thread that kept us together was us having built Hyperloop. Right. So at IIT Madras, we set up the Hyperloop team, which today stands as the most advanced team being partnered with the Indian Railways. And our confidence or our claim to fame per se is having met Elon Musk. So we're a team that built technology, went to SpaceX, and that was the fascination that, hey, we should do something in space. Right? Coincidentally, that budget session, we had an announcement that the space industry in India was going to be privatized. And that became the ideal opportunity for us to start something, right? To be able to use our tech exposure, use our highs of having visited SpaceX, and the policy relaxations of starting up in the Indian space ecosystem. When we started doubling down on this, we realized one major aspect, that satellite imagery was beginning to witness widespread commercial adoption internationally. Right? So we just saw numerous satellites launched by ISRO, NASA, European Space Agency, the Japan Space Agency, JAXA, and so on. There's a number of satellites that get launched. And now there are companies like you see the Adanis, the ITCs, the Reliances of the world, even the Walmarts of the world, right? They are procuring imagery themselves to gather insights. What kind of insights? Agriculture monitoring. So you'd see the largest of the banks internationally taking imagery to check how farms are performing, right? Are they in good health? Are they in bad health? How do you build a credit score for a farm? Second, dark ship monitoring. wherein you're dealing with a lot of illegal activities happening in the deepest of the oceans, and how do you monitor that? And an increasingly important market of carbon auditing, climate change, and a number of use cases. Like, we ended up listing like 140 use cases that you could use satellite imagery for. But one problem that we realized amidst all of these use cases was the data source available today had certain fundamental challenges. So today you have largely two kinds of satellite imagery that's available. There's optical images or there's radar images, synthetic aperture radar. Now, what is an optical image? An optical image is something that essentially is is much like a camera, just a little more advanced. So it captures information still in the visible spectrum, but in much finer wavelengths, right? What that results in is you have images like what you can see and analyze through human eyes. You have an image that you can just see and say, this is a car, this is a truck, this is a ship. But the problem comes where, although you have the information, you don't have the availability. Clouds. Right? Clouds form 60 to 70% of an obstruction globally, right? And for regions like India, it's about 75%. Regions like Europe, it's about 80%. And that was the birth of radar satellites, to say that radars could penetrate through clouds. And that's how synthetic aperture radar as a field evolved. So, taking an analogy to X-ray CT scan, these are sensors that generate some form of signals in the microwave region, penetrating through smoke, clouds, capturing images during the night time, and so on. Just like how you have X-rays, right? These are not things that people like us can just see and say, "Oh, I know that this is a car, this is a truck." Right? You need expertise. You need just like how you need radiologists, you need SAR experts to come in and say, "This is how I interpret a SAR image." Such kind of detailing had to happen, right? And hence that while that gave you 100% availability, it had poor interpretability. I wouldn't call it poor in information, but poor interpretability, right? And that's where we realized that single sensor imagery data remained inconsistent for any use case analysis. Now, when I say inconsistent, right, think about a use case, let's say where you had to uh, monitor our borders, right? I'll just take a very classic example. So if you were to monitor our borders, you ideally want to monitor our border at least once a day to make sure that there is no activity happening that you are not aware of. Technically, requirements go much higher, but even if it were once a day, now imagine a situation right now in the month of August. What you would end up seeing is you capture one image, you have a cloud-free image. The next 4 days, all you see is clouds, 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 clouds. And then you have another image. Now you don't know what's happened in those 4 days. You can't really act upon it. Whereas if you have radar images, your team is probably very limited as to who can interpret this. And the amount of area that you want to monitor is huge. And that is where we brought in the concept of data fusion as an ecosystem, right? Wherein we started experimenting at a software level of how we could merge these two sensor data sets to derive some insights. So this again insight could be, let's say, uh, again, I'll take an example in agriculture, right? So if you were to just assess how healthy a particular farm is it, as simple as if it's more yellow or more green, which defines how ripe or how dry the particular farm or the culture is, right? But radar as a sensor becomes more sensitive to, say, the moisture, gives you more precise indications of a lot more intrinsic properties of what you are monitoring. So people try to bring both of these sensors together, get complementary information, and solve certain use cases. But there we bumped into certain problems, right? So number one, temporal mismatch. So this works for an agriculture field because an agriculture field is right there. It's not going anywhere. But if you want to monitor a port and count the number of vessels in and out, right? If you wanted to monitor the damage due to a flood, in such cases, you have an optical image captured this morning and a radar image even being captured in the evening. You'll end up having the number of buildings that are damaged to be very different in both of these images. And that was the temporal mismatch. Second is the spatial mismatch. So these sensors capture very differently at different resolutions. Like we saw how satellites had gotten better from having a 1 kilometer resolution to today you have satellites that capture a 10 centimeter resolution. Right? That's the level of detailing that you have. And how do you align these to each other? And third, perspective mismatch. So different satellites operate in different orbits, they capture from different angles. Right? And software for computer vision on images, like let's say you want to, today you have a lot of generative AI coming in where you say that I want to see this dog's face a little tilted to the right. And that happens, right? Because you have enough data available. But that is not the case with satellite imagery yet. Right? So you can't run any such models and build these form of data fusion algorithms here. What is the impact of not being able to do it? I'll take three examples. Number one, maritime monitoring, where you want to assess how ships are moving, right? How's the international trade happening? How are their illegal activities, right? It's called IUU, which is illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing that goes on, right? All of these things, how do you monitor? So you take about 8 to 12 hours in the most advanced of the constellations to even make a decision. And by then the ship has probably sailed from one ocean to the other, right? So such kind of problems tend to happen if you don't have consistent data. Damage assessment for NatCat events, any natural catastrophe, right? Be it a flood, a tsunami, a hurricane, or whichever the case, you can't assess the damage. And why that is important is, one, from an impact perspective, we as the impacted folks need support, right? We want people to come in, help us with the relief items. The disaster response forces from the government need to come in and they need to know which area to prioritize and where do they first plan out their team deployments. And then you have the insurance companies who are most worried about this because they lose billions of dollars a year, right, for any such event that happens. So it's an impact ecosystem where each of us deal with our own share. And shrimp culture, agriculture, all of these use cases where your whole harvest, which is worth more than 10 lakhs, in some cases, even a few crores, could get wiped out in a day if you didn't monitor your farms well. And that's where we came in as a startup to say that let's solve this problem by taking a very, very technical approach and not the traditional SaaS approach. So what we did today, we are using sensors at a hardware level. We are building our own hybrid sensor based on these properties that can capture both multispectral or optical at large and synthetic aperture radar images at the same time. So you are monitoring an area that you know is making sure, okay, so I know exactly how the area looks, what are its intrinsic properties because of complementary sensors. And I'm not worried about the time being different. I'm not worried about the perspective being different, the resolution being different, because that is taken care at a sensor level. And what that leads to as an impact is your maritime monitoring becomes almost real time because you have all information about the ground. Clouds are no longer an obstruction. It takes you much lesser time to quantify the losses, and you can track diseases, predict them, and be able to act upon it much faster. So how do we do it, right? How does this actually solve the problem? Because you bring in two sensors together. Today, if you look at a cloud-free day, and these are images from our own sensors. So today, if you look at a cloud-free day, you can very evidently say that these two are buildings, that is a pond, right? That's an optical image. This is a radar image. So you see very clearly that these are objects in both optical and SAR because you have a cloud-free day, which is about 20% of the time that we are capturing. If you have a cloudy day, or let's say fog in case of our northern regions, an optical image is almost rendered useless, right? Because you can't say anything. All you know is that there are some objects, but your features are not so distinct. You can't derive any insights as to what is it that I can do, right? And therefore you take in a radar image, but the interpretability still becomes a question. And nighttime is, of course, you just have a black screen, right? What we propose, something that we are working on and are really vouching for the larger ecosystem to pitch in, is to take the current trends of generative AI and bring them to the satellite imagery ecosystem, right? So standing here at a forum like IIITB, for us, we want more of such teams, more of such projects to come in, wherein we take imagery data and the hype of the AI world, bring them together, right? Satellite imagery has taken its own journey, and the traditional software industries have taken their own journey. But now we think it is time for them to come together, wherein you have a radar image that ensures availability and you add interpretability to it through your AI models. Now, it's of course much easier said than done, but that is a journey that we see the ecosystem taking as we go forward. How do we do it? Is you have training data wherein you have optical images, radar images, and imagine a model being trained on this, wherein, let's say, a particular building or a car in a radar image, right, looks like ABC features in an optical image. And if your model is able to learn that, and during nighttime, cloudy weather, whichever the case where you don't have an optical image, your model will then regenerate an optical image. So that is at least bringing you interpretability consistently, even if there are clouds, right? And at the end of the day, what do you want as users, as industries, as government, as defense? The one thing that we remain very mindful of is we as users don't care and shouldn't care as to where the data is coming from. All that matters to us is, do I have an image of what I want to monitor, right? Like today, when I want to, let's say, find out the distance or time to a particular location, all I'm worried about is how much time is it, right? I don't think about, oh, how is this time being calculated? What are the satellites that are in correspondence for the communication? That's the use case mindset that we want to bring in here. And I'll end with one quick example of how we have demonstrated it, right? So we took an optical image with clouds for a much larger area, took a SAR image of a later date, had a model trained on top of it, and then regenerated an optical image. So what this ensures is, you know, when culture is happening, right? The level of impact of such consistency could be very dynamic. And I'll take three use cases. Defense being the most forward adopter of satellite imagery, right? You let's take any let's just simply take the Galwan Valley incident, which was publicly put out that, oh, we saw some settlements from our neighbors coming closer to our borders and so on. When we saw things like that, imagine if for 3 days you had clouds and you couldn't have an image, right? That would have impacted a lot of our activities. Second, if you look at disaster response, now if it's a flood or a cyclone, you know there is going to be clouds. It's a very obvious fact. But if you didn't have images through the event, right, 4 days later, once the clouds are cleared out, you anyway have enough connectivity to be able to say that, hey, I have damages in this part of the city, this part of the region. But the point is to be able to make it more real time, right? And much wider use cases in terms of biodiversity, climate mapping, forest fires, and the list goes on, right? So, long story short, what we intend to do and speak for is, while we're on our mission to build our own satellite, right? So we are one of the first companies in India to put up our own private constellation of satellites. But what we really want to push the industry towards is to come to that consensus of having satellite imagery as it has matured to come to much finer resolutions than we could ever imagine, and the AI world of what we see with the chat GPTs and the DALIs of the world coming together and seeing how do you make sure that this imagery data becomes a source of information and not just limited to research projects. So very quickly in one slide before I wrap up as to what Galaxeye is and what are we up to in life, we we're essentially building next gen technologies wherein we're building a hybrid sensor and different features of the satellite, again, largely inspired by ISRO as to how they've built their satellites. Just being a commercial player, putting in our own constraints. So we are not launching 2000 kg satellites, right? We're launching 200 kg satellites, but trying to ensure best of the features possible where you have agility to control your satellite, monitor during all time, all weather conditions, process on the edge. So today you see a lot of edge processing happening at CCTV cameras where they automatically detect certain faults that occur on the road, right? Imagine if you could do that from space and our armed forces in the border just got an alert that, hey, there is some movement happening 10 kilometers from your location. You don't need an image analyst waiting for the image to come to their control center, doing all the analysis and giving it to them one day later. Right? So stuff like that can happen, right? These are some initiatives that we want to pick up, miniaturized and energy optimized. So that's essentially about what I wanted to bring in. Again, around, thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's been an honor to be talking here.
So this is a question from online viewer. So how do we test for artifacts that may occur in the image translation model for SAR to optic in this domain? Also, any open source data sets available?
Of course, in terms of how do you test for artifacts, so when you define your training data set, it is imperative that you define pairs of SAR and optical against each other, right? You say that the features of a car in a radar, in an optical image, it's much evident. You have training data sets available already. But in a radar image, you know that a car or a building would have certain features, like how in one of my earlier slides, I showed what a radar image would look like. Then you have certain features that also these cross sections of a building, this is how a radar backscatter is, and hence map those features to color or to again geometry boundaries, those corners and edges, which essentially feature extraction in the optical images, and then be able to define them as ground truth. Right? To be able to do that, yes, there are enough open source data sets. For instance, you can look at there's a data set by two companies called Maxar and Capella Space, right, under the headline of SpaceNet. So you can just Google that up. There are enough SAR optical pairs uh, for static objects such as buildings, ports, city infrastructure, and so on. So that's something that we started with and continue to use. So more than happy to share those resources.
Thank you for the speech. We now we understand more about Galaxy and what you people do.
Thank you all for attending the workshop. We conclude the session now. Yeah, thank you.